radioactive puppies, mutating birds, babushkas that live in Chernobyl's exclusion zone, a crazy ecosystem of living organisms thriving in the radioactive-filled environment. Cute, adorable puppies with radioactive superpowers. And no, we cannot pet them. Because of the sudden catastrophic nuclear event that happened in Chernobyl, people quickly needed to leave their homes, and sadly, many of them had to leave their pets behind as well. But because of the immense flourishing that Chernobyl is going through, and with the lack of people in it, these dogs are thriving in the environment. Apparently, for the majority of animals here as well, the contamination isn't as broad and blanket ground poisoning as we used to believe. Within their body, however, scientists found what they call pockets of radioisotopes, basically literally having radiation flowing freely in their tiny little fur bodies, and yet being able to live with little to no complications. They also have about 15 distinct genetic groups, and even if they mixed with others, it would still be distinct. Because of this, however, in fear of it spreading further beyond their zones, there has been a continuous project in the works of neutering animals. Over 400 animals so far have been spayed during the first year of the specialized clinic's operation. In addition, we can't pet these lovelies simply because their fur has been found to have traces of radiation on them due to rubbing up against certain objects, etc. The population of gray wolves might just have enough radiation in their system to fight off cancer cells. An article from February of this year states the radiated wolves appear to have developed protective mutations that increase their odds of surviving cancer. What? While tracking down wolves since 2014, researchers have learned that the Chernobyl wolves are exposed to more than 11.28 millirem of radiation every single day. To quote the article from IFL Science, that's over 6 times the legal amount for human workers. The scientists want to use this discovery and utilize it to try and come up with a way to create these protective mutations for human cancer patients. However, because of the ongoing issue in our world today, these researchers have no idea when they'll be able to go back to further their studies. Another issue that follows is that these younger wolves have been seen to begin spreading out further and further out of their zone. As the population increases, the younger generation will be forced to move outwards to find their own territories. Endangered wild horses are making a huge comeback in these radioactive woods. They go by the name Przhevalsky horse, named after Nikolai Przhevalsky, who had first discovered this species in 1881. They are said to be the last species of wild horse in the world, and for some reason they love hanging around Chernobyl. Their population has grown to around 2,000, with some scattered in Asia, others in Europe, and many in the radioactive wasteland. These horses didn't appear here though until 1998, when the Askania Nova Nature Reserve in southern Ukraine had sent them in due to the land thriving without human activity. In only 20 years, the original 50 that survived the first transfer had their population multiplied by 5, with 2018 being the year where 22 foals were both in the exclusion zone. Their survival creates so many questions for scientists, and at the same time really show the effects that humans have on wildlife. I couldn't find much about their exposure to the radiation, or if they also carry radioisotopes, but I think we can assume based on where they chose to live, we shouldn't be petting these cuties either. Radioactive piggies, however, not just from Chernobyl's nuclear explosion. The wild boars that roam around Germany and Austria are not to be seen hunted or eaten, because new research has been suggested that Chernobyl isn't the only reason why these pigs are carrying radioactive cesium, but also due to the nuclear items testing done from 60 to 80 years prior. 60-year-old seized from nuclear items fallout contributes significantly to the notorious contamination levels in wild boars in Central Europe that were previously believed to be dominated by Chernobyl, one author writes. The soil, vegetation, and other foods that wild boars ate were already contaminated to begin with, and the explosion didn't really change much of the difference for them other than their radiation levels. 80% of the samples that they tested in Germany specifically went far above than regular consumption levels in cesium-tainted food, and 60% actually came from the nuclear testing and not the explosion. The author continued with the obvious ending comment of, future nuclear accidents or explosions could worsen these animals' contamination, potentially impacting food safety for decades. Birds, however, don't seem to have the best time with this, and some had even developed smaller brains and cataracts. This is due to the increased oxidative stress and low levels of antioxidants, and because of this, their nervous system development was completely tainted and caused incorrections, resulting in smaller brains and causing issues with their cognitive thinking. They tested this with 550 different birds, to which concluded 48 different species that lived in the area. They found that even though the post-traumatic stress wasn't as visible anymore, the negative impacts that the radiation had still lingered. Their brain size was compared by the volume of their head of how it should normally be in comparison to the rest of their body. The size was said to have gone down by 5% due to the radiation, and despite different species giving different results, it was still quite noticeable, especially in younger birds, to which their size was dramatically more different than the older generation. An interesting discovery though, some birds in higher radiation areas were doing far better in comparison to those in the low range. Due to their higher levels of antioxidants, it helps stop the cells from reacting to the ionizing radiation that naturally harms the DNA. Two species, however, weren't so lucky: the Paris major and barn swallows. They have much higher levels of pheomelanin in their feathers, and researchers suspected that they didn't have enough antioxidants to counteract the pheomelanin consuming the antioxidants. So yeah, birds have been getting the short end of the stick here. Giant mutated fish in the cooling pond due to radiation? That's what people had believed for the longest time, that these sea dwellers gained their size after the accident. When the accident happened, the first few hours were spent trying to cool off the reactor by pouring hundreds of liters of waters onto it. After that was done, they had to get rid of the water, and so they pumped it into the cooling pond and let it sit there for the next 30 years. The fish that were in the cooling pond are clearly radioactive, but not necessarily mutants. The reason why they gained the size they did was apparently because they were given the freedom to do so with the lack of human activity in the area. The largest catfish that they were able to get from this cooling pond measured 1.65 meters, or 5 feet and 4 inches, which is my height. But the reality is, if they are given the chance to do so, many freshwater catfish in Ukraine and Europe can live up to 100 years and grow up to 5 meters. The only weird thing is though, when workers had cut off some of the water that was coming into the cooling pond due to technical work, the water levels dropped and the catfish disappeared. They were last seen in 2018. Some say they were captured or they escaped, but I don't think anybody is dumb enough to eat a radioactive catfish. Despite what you've been told, there are also people living in these exclusion zones. Could you believe that there are about 100 older people, mostly women, still living there? One woman, 75, named Valentina Ivanova, says the exclusion zone is not a prison, who even fishes in a river that passes the old nuclear plant. She is a firm believer that life there is much better in comparison to that in the city. In Kiev, I have passed long ago, 5 times over. Every car releases the whole periodic table into the air, and you inhale that into your lungs, she would continue to state. Within the actual documentary, Babushkas of Chernobyl, there is a scene where she is being examined at a medical clinic to see how her levels of cesium were. The doctor told her that she was fine, but despite that, still obviously warned her to be wary about what she consumed from the soil. One speculation that they were making as to why she was okay was possibly due to socio-psychological factors, kinda similar to the story of a woman lifting up a car to get her child. Do you think you'd be willing to spend some time in the exclusion zone? For those puppies, yeah, I totally would. Stay creepy out there.
You made it to the end of the video. Stick around and click this video next. It's about unbelievable Titanoboa sightings that will shock you. Click the video now to find out more.